The woman actually pushed her best friend off the cliff with her own hands. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she suddenly realized that her sleeve had been torn. To avoid leaving anything suspicious at the scene, she carefully rushed down to the bottom of the cliff. Her plan was to destroy all evidence of the crime, but to her shock, in just the blink of an eye, Julia had already vanished. On the ground, all that remained was a blood-stained necklace. It was clear that falling from such a height hadn't killed Julia. Realizing the danger, Jackie instantly felt that something was terribly wrong. At that moment, Julia had already fled into the forest, but because of her serious injuries, her movements were painfully slow. On the verge of death, she quickly snapped her dislocated arm back into place. The excruciating pain caused her to vomit uncontrollably. Before she could even catch her breath, Jackie's voice suddenly echoed from behind. Julia hurriedly hid at the bottom of a slope. Not daring to make the slightest move, she had no strength left to fight back. If she were discovered, it would surely mean death. But to her surprise, Jackie stood above, pouring out endless remorse. She claimed it had all been an accident, that she had never meant to hurt her. Now, she said, she was deeply worried about Julia's condition. Hearing her friend's words of concern, Julia began to slowly stand up. But just then, Jackie's expression suddenly shifted. Her eyes filled with murderous intent. In that instant, Julia understood everything. Jackie's lies were nothing but a trap to lure her out. The very next moment, Jackie started crying again, pretending to be heartbroken. Now Julia finally saw her friend's true colors. Terrified, she covered her own mouth with her hand, not daring to make a sound. When Julia failed to appear after a long time, Jackie had no choice but to leave. But her constant switching between cruelty and sorrow had already put Julia on guard. Julia no longer dared to move recklessly. That's how the long night dragged on. Just when Julia thought she was finally safe, Jackie appeared again. The sudden sound made Julia shiver in terror. To her shock, even in the dead of night, Jackie still refused to let her go. The two of them were less than 10 meters apart. If Jackie just turned her head, she would have spotted Julia instantly. Luckily, a heavy downpour came out of nowhere. Although Jackie was unwilling, she had no choice but to retreat. Frustrated and resentful, she finally left. Julia narrowly escaped another brush with death. After enduring an entire night of torment, Julia was dizzy and utterly exhausted. At this point, she could no longer just sit and wait for death. Meanwhile, Jackie was already prepared, armed with a sniper rifle. She returned to the forest to hunt Julia down, but what she didn't expect was, Julia had already circled back to the cabin the moment she stepped inside. Her first instinct was to call for help, but the phone was gone, and the computer had no internet. Forcing herself to stay calm, she endured the stabbing pain and began stitching up her wounds with a needle and thread. She knew the only way to survive was to treat her injuries as quickly as possible. A piercing scream of agony sent Jackie rushing back to the cabin, but when she stormed inside, all she found were used medical supplies on the floor. Julia, however, was nowhere to be seen. At that moment, Julia was out on the lake, frantically rowing a boat, fleeing for her life. Soon, Jackie caught up to the shore. She raised her gun and fired at Julia. Fortunately, the bullets missed. As Julia's boat drifted farther and farther away, Jackie quickly leapt into another boat. Without hesitation, she started chasing her down. The distance between them closed rapidly. Julia rowed with all her might, desperately trying to escape Jackie's pursuit, but with her body covered in wounds, her strength was fading fast. No matter how hard she rowed, the boat just wouldn't move fast enough. Within moments, Jackie caught up from behind. Julia was now cornered, with nowhere left to run. Jackie quickly jumped onto Julia's boat. Before Julia could even react, she had already been firmly restrained. Just as Jackie was about to strike a deadly blow, a man suddenly appeared on the shore, interrupting Jackie's original plan. Now that there was a witness, Jackie had no choice but to stop. Afraid of exposing the truth, Jackie immediately warned Julia not to act rashly. She then put on a performance to respond to the man, trying to avoid further suspicion. But unexpectedly, Julia suddenly spoke up, inviting the man to her house that evening, and the man readily agreed without hesitation. Helpless, Jackie could only take Julia back home first, but in her fury, she was not about to let Julia off easily. After venting her rage on her, Jackie once again threatened Julia, warning her not to say anything. or else she wouldn't be the only one to suffer. Soon night fell, and the man arrived with his wife as promised. While Jackie went to fetch a bottle of wine, Julia secretly told the man's wife what had happened, but unfortunately, Jackie happened to see everything. The woman quickly urged her husband outside to leave, yet the man had no idea what was going on. The scene before them left both women frozen in terror, trembling in place. Jackie then charged back into the house with a knife. Seeing this, the two women hurriedly fled upstairs, but in their panic, they were soon tackled to the ground by Jackie. No matter how desperately they begged, Jackie remained completely unmoved. She then, right in front of Julia, dismembered their bodies. Afterward, under the cover of night, she dumped the remains into the river. The next morning, Jackie prepared a final breakfast for Julia. Julia could hardly believe that her once best friend had now turned into a murderous demon. At that moment, Julia accidentally noticed a decoration on the wall. Behind the bear's head was a hidden box. Inside, she found necklaces identical to her own. In an instant, Julia realized the truth. Each time Jackie befriended someone new, she would gift them a specially made necklace. And clearly, all those people had already been killed. Now, Julia understood. She was destined to be the next one. Realizing her secret had been exposed, Jackie took Julia to the cliff, but Julia was no longer willing to sit and wait for death. She launched a surprise attack, then immediately escaped from the car. However, the injection hadn't hit a vital spot. Jackie quickly recovered and immediately chased after her. Julia ran frantically, desperate to escape. Jackie pursued right behind her, closing in step by step. In her panic, Julia ended up back at the very spot she had fallen before. Now she had nowhere left to run. Jackie was already upon her. Just as Julia was about to meet her end, Jackie suddenly succumbed to the effects of the drug and collapsed to the ground. At this moment, after a painful struggle, Julia chose to spare Jackie. She drove away on her own, but she hadn't gone far before another thought struck her. She realized that Jackie's endless cruelty would only bring more innocent victims to misfortune, so she turned back and returned to the cliff. To her shock, Jackie was nowhere to be found. Sensing danger, Julia rushed back to the cabin, but after searching inside and out, she still found nothing. Determined to end Jackie once and for all, Julia was willing to risk exposing her own location. The blaring music soon lured Jackie to her, and just then, Julia suddenly appeared from behind. At this moment, Jackie dared not make any reckless move. It was only then that Julia finally understood why she had been hunted. She had once purchased a large accidental death insurance policy, and the sole beneficiary was Jackie. It turned out Jackie had befriended her only with the intention of committing insurance fraud. To get the money, Jackie had to fake Julia's accidental death. The revelation broke Julia's heart. Furious, she pulled the trigger at Jackie. Then she carefully went upstairs to search, but to her surprise, Jackie appeared right behind her. As the chandelier swung back and forth, Julia was struck and lost consciousness. Jackie quickly dragged her all the way back to the cliff. Julia, trapped and helpless, was destined to perish there.
No, please,
Meanwhile, Jackie grew impatient to move forward with her fraud scheme, but just as she put down the phone, she suddenly felt dizzy and weak. Her diabetes struck, and she urgently needed an insulin shot. Yet soon she realized that even after the injection, her condition didn't improve. Her eyes fell on the computer sitting on the table. Inside was a video Julia had recorded beforehand. It revealed that Julia had already laced Jackie's medication with deadly poison. Once injected, it caused blood clots to form in her veins. Jackie never imagined Julia had left such a fatal trap. She sniffed the medicine and confirmed it was no longer the familiar scent. But by now, it was already far too late. Terrified, she stumbled through the forest, desperately trying to slow the clotting, but before she could get far, she collapsed uncontrollably to the ground. And at that very moment, a black bear emerged from the woods.